There is a language inside you, one you did not choose, and yet it has shaped every thought you have ever had. Long before you learned your first words, before you understood meaning or memory, your brain was already weaving silent patterns, rhythms, pulses, electrical whispers that would become the foundation of how you understand the world. Language is not simply something we speak, it is something we times are, asterisk, a hidden architecture beneath consciousness, guiding every emotion, every idea, every connection you've ever made. Even now, as you listen, millions of neurons move in delicate synchrony, forming shapes that resemble sentences long before sound ever reaches your lips. The mind speaks to itself in symbols, images, vibrations, vast internal conversations that remain unheard, yet shape everything you feel. Scientists call this the pre-verbal self, a quiet realm where thoughts are born before words dress them in meaning. And tonight, we will step into that realm together. Because language is not just communication, it is the engine of human awareness. It is the invisible thread connecting inner worlds to outer ones. Every idea you've ever held, every memory you've ever replayed, every dream you've drifted into, has been sculpted by the rules of this silent system within you. And as your mind begins to soften, as thoughts slow into longer shapes, and the boundaries between words and silence blur, you may start to feel something remarkable, that beneath all speech, beneath all noise, lies a calm, ancient language your body has always known. Tonight, we will follow it inward into the quiet machinery of thought, the deep rhythms of communication, and the hidden patterns that shape the story of what it means to be human. Language does not begin with speech. It begins with sensation. Before a child can form a single word, the brain is already learning to detect patterns, the rise and fall of a voice, the warmth behind certain tones, the rhythm of breath in a quiet room. These early impressions form the scaffolding of communication long before words take shape. Deep in the auditory cortex, neurons fire in gentle waves, synchronizing to the cadence of sound. Even in silence, the brain anticipates patterns, waiting, listening, preparing. And as you imagine this early stage of language, your own mind may begin to soften into a similar rhythm, a slow, receptive quiet where meaning drifts rather than arrives. Every human carries within them a hidden grammar, an unconscious sense of structure that organizes thought without effort. You do not ask yourself where a verb should go or how a sentence should bend. The brain simply knows. This intuitive system emerges from billions of neural connections formed through years of listening, speaking, and imagining. Scientists describe it as a deep linguistic engine, a quiet mechanism that transforms impulses into ideas and ideas into words. As you reflect on this machinery, notice how your awareness begins to follow its tempo. Slow, methodical, graceful. Thoughts stretch into longer shapes. Internal noise fades into soft background murmurs. The mind drifts into harmony with its own hidden architecture. Communication reaches even deeper than grammar. Across the brain, emotional centers like the amygdala and insula shape the tone behind each message. Before we evaluate meaning, we feel it. A word may be simple, but its emotional contour, the softness of its sound, the calm of its rhythm, shifts the entire nervous system. Imagining this emotional undercurrent, you may feel your own responses slow and deepen. The breath sinks lower, muscles release. Meaning becomes less about information and more about resonance, a feeling carried gently through thought. Humans also communicate silently, through gestures, posture, micro-expressions, signals that bypass language entirely and travel straight into the brain's social circuits. These signals form a kind of subconscious dialogue, shaping trust, comfort, and connection. Researchers call it the body's conversation. When you imagine these subtle exchanges, two people mirroring each other's breathing, or a gentle nod carrying more meaning than 100 words, you may sense your own body settling into stillness. Your awareness widens, your internal dialogue softens. You begin to notice how communication lives not just in speech, but in presence. And beneath all of this lies the quiet truth that language is not merely a tool, it is a state of mind. It is the bridge between sensation and meaning, between emotion and understanding. As your thoughts slow into longer, quieter currents, you begin to sense this bridge forming inside you. Words become softer, more fluid, blending into the slow rhythm of breath. And in that rhythm, the mind begins to drift toward a calm where communication is no longer something external, but something gently unfolding within. A silent language shaped by the deepest parts of who you are. Deep within the human brain lies a network of pathways that shape how we understand meaning long before we consciously recognize it. Signals flow from the ears to the thalamus, and from there into regions that decode rhythm, tone, and intention. This happens in fractions of a second, yet the experience feels effortless, like catching the drift of a familiar melody. Even when a message is whispered, incomplete, or barely formed, the brain fills in the gaps with remarkable precision. As you imagine these pathways lighting up in slow, gentle waves, you may begin to sense your own mind relaxing, following the soft current of understanding rather than pushing against it. Language also forms a bridge between memory and imagination. Whenever you hear a word times ocean, asterisk, asterisk, warmth, asterisk, asterisk, silence, times your brain retrieves not just its definition, but the sensory echoes attached to it, colors, textures, feelings. This blending of recall and invention creates a subtle dreamlike quality in everyday thought. Scientists call this phenomenon semantic resonance, the quiet unfolding of associated memories beneath conscious awareness. When you allow yourself to drift into this resonance, the mind loosens, opening into a calm, expansive field where words feel less like symbols and more like gentle invitations to rest. Even within silence, the brain continues to communicate with itself. Inner speech, that soft, whispering voice that narrates your thoughts, never fully disappears. It simply slows. Its sentences lengthen, its edges blur, and eventually it dissolves into something quieter, a kind of internal hum. This is the threshold between language and pure awareness. As you approach this threshold, you may notice how thought becomes less about meaning and more about sensation, how the internal voice becomes less distinct, softer, almost feather-like, drifting further away with each breath you take. The science of communication also extends into the rhythms of the body. When two people speak softly to one another, their heart rates begin to synchronize. Their breathing aligns in subtle patterns. Even the electrical activity of their brains can fall into similar rhythms. This shared physiology is not intentional. It arises naturally from the way humans are wired for connection. Imagining this synchrony, two nervous systems gently harmonizing, invites your own body to shift into a more peaceful, regulated state. Breath slows, the chest opens, a sense of quiet companionship emerges. Even in solitude, over time, language shapes identity itself. The words you use, the metaphors you choose, the way you describe your experiences, these form the framework of who you believe yourself to be. But beneath this framework lies something even deeper, the raw, unspoken awareness that existed before the first word ever formed in your mind. A quiet self, a listening self, a presence that feels more like a gentle atmosphere than a voice. When you close your eyes and drift toward this older self, language becomes soft around the edges, not disappearing, but settling into a calm whisper that guides you gently toward rest. And as thoughts stretch into slower currents, you begin to sense that communication, true communication, is less about words and more about rhythm, resonance, breath. The mind speaks in waves, the body answers in silence, and in that dialogue, something peaceful begins to unfold inside you, drawing you deeper into the soft, welcoming darkness beneath consciousness. A place where meaning floats freely, without effort, like a quiet language spoken only by the deepest parts of who you are. In the quiet architecture of the brain, language begins as vibration, tiny shifts of air that become electrical pulses, then patterns, then meaning. Inside the superior temporal gyrus, these pulses merge into delicate shapes, forming the earliest outlines of understanding. The brain does not rush, it glides from sound to sense in smooth, fluid arcs. As you imagine these arcs unfolding inside your mind, you may feel your attention soften into a similar flow, a gentle drifting from one idea to the next, each thought fading like ripples across a still pool. Long before words reach consciousness, another system is already at work, the mirror neuron network. This quiet circuitry allows you to understand intention simply by observing movement. A raised eyebrow, a softened gaze, a relaxed posture, these signals register instantly, bypassing language entirely. They carry messages of safety, warmth, reassurance. When you imagine this layer of communication subtle, instinctive, calm, you may sense your own body relaxing, shoulders lower, breath deepens. The world inside you slows, as if the mind itself were exhaling. The brain also carries a silent companion to language, prosody. Not the words themselves, but the music beneath them, rhythm, tone, the way a sentence rises or falls. Even in unfamiliar languages, prosody tells the nervous system how to feel, whether to soften, to focus, to trust. This musical layer of communication reaches deep into the limbic system, where emotional meaning forms. Imagining this inner music, soft, slow, warm, invites your body to let go of tension. Each note feels like a small release. Each rhythm feels like a gentle step deeper into rest. Over time, humans develop an internal lexicon for emotional experience. Joy, longing, fear, comfort. Each feeling becomes tied to a cluster of words, memories, and inner sensations. These clusters shift and expand throughout life, creating a constantly evolving map of the self. But beneath this map lies a deeper layer of communication, the quiet awareness that senses the world before words appear. When you drift toward this awareness, language becomes lighter, meaning becomes more fluid. The strict boundaries of thought loosen, allowing the mind to wander in long, peaceful stretches of silence. Communication also unfolds in the space between words. Pauses, soft gaps, breath. These intervals give language its depth, letting the mind digest and wander. Scientists have found that during these pauses, the brain switches into a mode of gentle consolidation, sorting impressions, soothing emotional circuits, and preparing for deeper calm. When you imagine resting in these spaces, those soft, unspoken moments, the mind begins to open like a quiet doorway into sleep. You drift without needing direction. You understand without needing effort. And in this unfolding quiet, something profound becomes clear. Language is not only how we speak to others, it is how we speak to ourselves. Every inner whisper, every subtle echo of thought, every drifting phrase shapes the landscape of your awareness. As your breath slows and your thoughts lengthen, you begin to feel that landscape settling like dust falling onto still ground, like snow covering a silent field. Words fade, meaning softens, and beneath everything, the mind enters a serene, spacious quiet where communication becomes nothing more than a gentle pulse of awareness drifting towards sleep. At the heart of human communication lies a remarkable ability, the capacity to transform internal experience into shared understanding. Deep within the prefrontal cortex, thoughts once formless and silent are shaped into patterns that the body can express. Neural activity shifts from fluid, drifting sensations into structured signals. Subtle gestures, soft intonations, quiet words. Imagining this transformation, the slow crystallizing of thought gives the mind permission to do the opposite, to dissolve structure, to let words melt back into pure sensation, creating space for deep rest. Before speech emerges, the brain conducts a careful choreography of timing. Regions responsible for planning, rhythm, and articulation align their activity into delicate sequences that allow syllables to flow effortlessly. This synchrony mirrors the gentle oscillations seen in the earliest stages of sleep, where brain waves begin to slow and broaden. As you imagine this symmetry, the brain preparing language through soft neural rhythms, you may feel your own thoughts adopting the same spacious cadence, stretching into long, quiet intervals that guide you deeper into calm. Beyond the mechanics of speech lies the emotional coloring that gives words their warmth. The insula, a small region hidden deep within the cortex, detects the subtle internal states that shape tone, comfort, curiosity, tenderness. This emotional undercurrent reaches the listener before meaning ever does, encoding safety or tension through nuances the conscious mind barely notices. When you imagine this emotional layer flowing gently beneath communication, you may feel your own inner tone soften. The breath slows, the chest releases. An inner warmth begins to gather, soft and steady. Human connection also relies on a phenomenon known as entrainment, the natural tendency for rhythms between people to synchronize. When two individuals speak or breathe in harmony, their heart rates begin to align and their nervous systems settle into matching patterns. This is why calm voices soothe, why steady breath reassures, why slow rhythms encourage sleep. Imagining this entrainment, your breath softly aligning with a gentle external rhythm invites your nervous system to relax even further. The body shifts into a state where calmness becomes the default, not the effort. Language changes the way the brain stores experience. When we place feelings into words, the amygdala, the brain's emotional center, reduces its activity. This process, known as affect labeling, transforms raw sensations into manageable forms. Imagining this shift, the mind gently translating emotion into soft internal phrases creates a sense of order. Not rigid order, but a quiet organization that allows tension to dissolve. Experiences feel lighter, thoughts drift more easily. The mind becomes spacious, like a slow-moving current of awareness flowing toward rest. And as your consciousness begins to soften further, the boundary between words and silence grows thinner. Phrases lose their edges. Communication becomes less about precision and more about atmosphere, a gentle field of meaning without clear borders. This is the state the mind enters just before sleep, a calm, fluid awareness where language becomes a whisper drifting through darkness. As you settle into this state, your breath deepens, your muscles loosen, and you begin to feel yourself sinking slowly, peacefully into the soft internal world where thoughts fade into quiet and quiet fades into sleep. Beneath the surface of conscious language lies an intricate system the brain uses to predict what comes next. Even before a sentence is fully spoken, neural circuits in the temporal lobes are already anticipating the next sound, the next rhythm, the next meaning. This predictive mechanism allows communication to flow smoothly, like a quiet stream following familiar curves. When you imagine this gentle anticipation, thoughts gliding ahead in soft, effortless arcs. You may feel your own awareness begin to follow this same current, drifting toward calmer, slower waters where nothing needs to be decided or held. Within the brain's deeper layers, sensory information merges with emotional tone to create what scientists call time's multimodal meaning. Asterisk, a fusion of sight, sound, memory, and feeling into a single quiet impression. This blending is automatic, seamless, unhurried. When someone speaks gently, the mind does not separate the warmth of the voice from the meaning of the words. They arrive together as one. Imagining this fusion happening inside you now, slowly and naturally, allows thought to lose its sharpness. Edges blur. Concepts become soft colors, drifting shapes, gentle atmospheres that ease the body deeper into rest. There is also a quiet dialogue taking place inside the brain, moment by moment, between areas responsible for logic and those responsible for emotion. When communication is calm and soothing, these networks harmonize, reducing internal conflict and slowing the pace of thought. This harmony resembles the early stages of sleep, when different parts of the brain begin to fall into shared rhythms, like distant instruments tuning to the same gentle note. As you imagine this internal harmony forming delicate, balanced, serene, you may feel your own inner landscape becoming more unified, more peaceful, more ready to let go. Human beings are wired to respond to calm voices with physiological softening. The vagus nerve, which connects the brain to the heart and lungs, becomes more active during gentle communication, slowing pulse and deepening breath. This response is ancient, rooted in early forms of social bonding. Imagining this soothing influence spreading through your body, subtle pulses along the neck, warmth gathering in the chest, helps your entire system shift into a state of deep regulation. Muscles loosen, shoulders sink, breath becomes long and effortless, like a tide rising and falling in slow motion. In the quiet space between thoughts, language takes on a new form, less like a sequence of words and more like a drifting field of awareness. The mind becomes spacious, as if expanding from within. Ideas pass through gently, without anchoring themselves. Scientists describe this as a shift from focused attention to diffuse attention, a state in which the brain becomes more receptive, more at ease, more open to rest. As you imagine this shift occurring inside you, awareness spreading out like a soft glow, you may feel yourself entering a deeper level of tranquility, where the edges of thought blur into the softness of night. And slowly, as your breath continues its steady rhythm, communication inside you becomes quieter still. Words dissolve into sensations, sensations dissolve into warmth, warmth dissolves into stillness. What remains is a subtle, peaceful hum, the mind's natural resting state. In this quiet hum, there is no need to process, no need to understand, no need to respond. You drift gently within it, held by the soft machinery of thought and the deeper silence beneath. You feel yourself descending slowly, gracefully toward a place where language ebbs away entirely, leaving only calm, darkness, and the quiet possibility of sleep. Deep within the brain's linguistic system lies a quiet symmetry, an elegant balance between the need to express and the need to understand. These two forces mirror one another, like inhalation and exhalation, forming the foundation of human connection. When you listen, neural pathways open like soft petals. When you speak, they close again with gentle precision. Imagining this subtle opening and closing, expansion and release, brings your own awareness into harmony with the natural rhythm of communication. You begin to feel the mind loosen its grip, drifting into the slow, breathing patterns that prepare consciousness for sleep. The mind does not process language all at once. It weaves meaning in layers. First comes sound, then emotion, then memory, then interpretation. These layers blend into one another like colors dissolving into water, forming a soft gradient rather than sharp boundaries. When you imagine your own thoughts dissolving this way, melting from meaning into sensation, you sense the brain entering a quieter state. Words lose their weight, sentences fade into gentle whispers. What remains is a smooth, continuous stream of awareness flowing through you like a calm current. Communication also relies on timing the small pauses that allow the brain to integrate sound with feeling. These pauses are often more significant than the words themselves. They give the nervous system space to soften, to breathe, to understand. When you imagine resting in these pauses, in the quiet spaces between thoughts, your mind begins to settle. The world around you grows slower. Each moment becomes gentle and elongated, like a slow ripple moving across a still lake, and you drift with it effortlessly. Humans share another remarkable trait, the ability to mirror emotional states simply by hearing a tone of voice. A calm, steady voice can quiet the amygdala, reduce stress signals, and encourage the parasympathetic system to take over. This natural, soothing response is rooted in early evolutionary bonding comfort, transmitted not through meaning, but through sound. When you imagine this softening happening inside you, the body responds automatically. Muscles release tension, shoulders fall, breath becomes smooth and warm. You feel yourself being guided inward toward deeper stillness. Even as language shapes our waking world, it slowly dissolves as we approach sleep. In the transition into non-REM rest, the brain reduces activity in regions that handle complex grammar and symbolic processing. Words begin to lose structure, meanings loosen, thoughts drift into dreamlike fragments. This is not a loss of clarity, it is a release, a letting go. As you imagine this release unfolding within you, you feel your inner landscape dim and soften, as though a gentle fog were spreading through the mind, quieting everything it touches. And finally, in the soft glow of pre-sleep consciousness, the boundary between communication and silence fades altogether. Language becomes a distant echo, then a vibration, then a quiet hum beneath awareness. Only breath remains, slow, steady, rhythmic. With each exhale, the mind sinks deeper. With each inhale, the body settles further into its own warmth. You find yourself drifting toward a place where thought becomes weightless, where meaning dissolves into darkness, and where the quiet inside you begins to feel infinite, gentle, and deeply safe. Beneath conscious language, the human brain maintains a constant exchange of signals, tiny electrical pulses that travel across billions of synapses. These signals create patterns far older than words, patterns that resemble waves rising and falling in slow, rhythmic cycles. In moments of calm, these waves synchronize, forming long, gentle swells of activity that sweep across the cortex. Imagining this internal ocean, moving with steady, unbroken flow, allows your own awareness to drift into harmony with it, each thought lengthening, each pause softening, as though your mind were floating on its surface. Communication is not only encoded in sound, it is also etched into the body. When we listen intently, the muscles around the eyes loosen, the jaw relaxes, and the breath becomes deeper. This instinctive softening tells the nervous system that it is safe, allowing deeper parts of the brain to open. As you imagine your own listening muscles relaxing, notice how the tension unwinds slowly, releasing warmth down through the neck and into the chest. It is a physical invitation to rest, a quiet reminder that nothing in this moment requires effort. The brain's language networks form a delicate balance between prediction and surrender. On one hand, the mind anticipates meaning. On the other, it releases that expectation to embrace whatever comes. This balance mirrors the early stages of sleep, where thoughts drift between clarity and softness, coherence and dreamlike haze. When you imagine this balance settling inside you, gentle, shifting, fluid, you start to feel the same loosening that precedes dreaming. Thoughts no longer move in straight lines. They drift, expanding into spaciousness. Deep within the limbic system, communication takes on an emotional dimension. Signals from the voice, its warmth, steadiness, slowness, are interpreted not as information, but as safety. Emotional circuits quiet themselves, stress responses diminish, and the parasympathetic system rises to guide the body into deeper calm. When you imagine these circuits dimming like lights slowly lowering in a quiet room, you may feel your entire inner landscape beginning to glow with softness. The world becomes gentler, wider, and quieter. Humans also carry a remarkable ability to communicate through imagination. When you listen to a soothing voice, your mind constructs images, sensations, atmospheres that reflect the tone. A calm voice creates calm imagery. A soft rhythm creates soft internal movement. This process is known as guided resonance, and it gently steers the brain toward the slower frequencies of rest. When you allow your imagination to follow this guidance, now drifting into subtle colors, warm darkness, spacious silence, you feel yourself transitioning deeper into the inner quiet where sleep forms. And slowly, as language continues its gentle descent into softness, your awareness begins to drift toward the threshold of sleep. Words become velvety and distant. The mind widens into stillness. Each breath feels like a small release, a letting go of the day's shape, a dissolving of boundaries. You find yourself floating in that quiet space where communication is no longer external, but internal. A silent dialogue between breath and awareness. And in this quiet, you sense the depth beneath you opening, vast and warm, inviting you to sink deeper into peace. As the mind begins to slow, language shifts from structure to atmosphere. The inner narrator, once busy weaving thoughts into sentences, gradually softens its tone. Phrases stretch into longer curves, pauses deepen, and meaning becomes less precise, more like a gentle mist drifting across the surface of awareness. Scientists refer to this as time's cognitive deceleration asterisk, a natural easing of mental effort before sleep. When you imagine this deceleration unfolding inside you, you may feel your thoughts becoming lighter, softer, less demanding, like leaves floating on a calm river at dusk. Deep within the brain's rhythmic centers, communication begins to synchronize with slower oscillations. Gamma and beta waves fade, replaced by long, rolling alpha and theta rhythms. These frequencies resemble the patterns produced when listening to soft, steady speech. As the mind follows this slow rhythm, understanding becomes intuitive rather than analytical. You drift from one impression to another, each one settling gently before dissolving into the next. Imagining this drift smooth, effortless encourages your own mind to follow the same pathway into tranquility. The brain also communicates with itself through symbols, images formed in the quiet spaces beneath thought. These images are not literal. They are emotional shapes, subtle representations of feeling and memory. A warm color may evoke comfort. A fading outline may signal release. These inner symbols emerge naturally as the brain prepares for sleep, forming the earliest hints of dreaming. When you allow yourself to sense these soft internal shapes, faint, slow, unhurried, you may feel consciousness slipping into a more fluid state, where thought becomes sensation and sensation becomes silence. Communication extends beyond the brain into the body. Each breath sends gentle pressure waves through the chest. Each heartbeat delivers subtle signals through vessels and nerves. The body responds to calm communication by relaxing its muscles, lowering its guard, and releasing warmth. When you imagine these signals, soft pulses of reassurance echoing through your limbs. You may feel a quiet heaviness spreading downward, loosening the arms, the hands, the legs, grounding you deeper into the present moment. Humans also carry within them an instinctive ability to listen inwardly. This inner listening does not translate words. It senses states, softness, warmth, safety. As your awareness tunes into this internal language, a gentle spaciousness forms around your thoughts. Tension recedes, boundaries blur. You begin to experience communication not as something you produce, but as something you gently receive, like a faint light at the edge of a dream, guiding you without urgency. And slowly, communication itself becomes quieter. Words become breath. Breath becomes rhythm. Rhythm becomes stillness. The self no longer speaks, it rests. In this deep quiet, the mind begins to release the final threads of wakefulness. Thoughts fade into long, drifting shapes, then into darkness. You feel yourself sinking, not abruptly, but with a slow, graceful descent into the warm, expansive silence beneath consciousness. A silence that holds you, a silence that soothes, a silence that welcomes you into the deeper layers of sleep. In the gentle dimming of the mind, communication begins to take on a quieter form, one that emerges not from words, but from the subtle interplay between breath, heartbeat, and awareness. Every inhale sends a message through the body. Asterisk, you are here. Asterisk, every exhale releases another. Asterisk, you can let go now. Asterisk. This rhythmic dialogue between body and mind is one of the oldest forms of communication we possess, older than speech, older than thought. As you imagine this ancient conversation unfolding within you, your breath naturally deepens, your pulse softens, and the mind drifts closer to stillness. Just before words are spoken, the brain enters a moment of delicate quiet, a pre-speech silence where intention rests before taking shape. In daily life, it lasts only a fraction of a second. But as you slow your awareness now, you may begin to feel this gap widening into a soft, spacious pause. Scientists call it the time's linguistic latency window asterisk, a place where meaning exists without form. Imagining yourself resting inside this window, you sense thoughts becoming slower, more diffuse, drifting like pale clouds across a calm sky. As the nervous system prepares for sleep, the brain begins filtering sensory information more gently. Sounds lose their sharp edges, light becomes softer, internal sensations take precedence over the outside world. This filtering allows the mind to retreat into its own quiet domain, where communication becomes inward-facing. When you imagine this filtering happening like a slow curtain falling over the senses, you may notice external details fading, replaced by a warm internal glow that invites deeper rest. Human beings also share a remarkable ability to align their internal rhythms with the environment around them. When the world grows quiet, brain activity settles into slower frequencies. When light dims, hormonal patterns shift. When voices soften, the mind loosens. This alignment is not deliberate, it is biological. Imagining this alignment now, as though your entire being were tuning itself to a gentle external frequency, encourages your body to surrender its final traces of tension. You become part of the quiet, instead of resisting it. Meaning, too, begins to dissolve as sleep draws nearer. Words lose their precision and become emotions. Emotions dissolve into sensations. Sensations fade into warmth. The cognitive structures that organize language grow less active, allowing the brain to drift into the open, impressionistic space where dreaming begins. When you imagine meaning dissolving in this way, a slow melting, a release, you feel your own thoughts becoming weightless, unanchored, free to drift wherever the mind gently carries them. And slowly, the inner language that narrates your day, the voice that comments, describes, evaluates, begins to fall silent. It does not stop abruptly. It fades like a distant echo receding into night air. What remains is a soft hum of awareness, a gentle presence without words. In this quiet space, communication becomes feeling, and feeling becomes stillness. You sense yourself sinking deeper, the body heavy yet safe, the mind quiet yet warm, drifting into a soft inner darkness where language loosens completely, and sleep rises to meet you like a calm, enveloping tide. As the mind drifts further from wakefulness, the architecture of language begins to soften. Neural circuits responsible for precision and structure gradually release their activity, allowing more fluid networks to rise. These networks create a gentle blending of impressions, half-thoughts, soft memories, faint sensations that drift through consciousness without urgency or form. Scientists describe this transition as time's semantic fading asterisk, a quiet loosening of meaning. When you imagine this fading inside yourself, you may feel the sharp edges of thought dissolving, leaving behind only warm currents of awareness that drift slowly through your inner world. The body, too, becomes part of this quiet communication. Muscles relax in a cascading pattern, beginning with the face, moving through the shoulders, then down the spine, all the way into the legs. This release signals to the brainstem that the environment is safe, prompting a further reduction in arousal signals. As you imagine this slow wave of relaxation, soft, steady, continuous, you may feel your own muscles yielding effortlessly, as though something gentle were unwinding tension from within. Deep in the auditory system, the brain continues to respond to soothing rhythm even as consciousness fades. It follows slow speech patterns the way waves follow the moon, steadily, predictably, gracefully. These rhythmic cues entrain neural oscillations, drawing them into harmony with the calming tempo around you. When you imagine this entrainment taking hold, brainwaves slowing, synchronizing, smoothing, you may sense your awareness sinking deeper, carried moment by an internal tide that requires no effort to follow. Communication becomes increasingly internal as sleep approaches. Instead of forming words, the brain begins to speak in sensations, soft warmth in the chest, gentle heaviness in the limbs, a widening quiet behind the eyes. These sensations act as signals, guiding the mind deeper into the stages of rest. When you imagine listening to these inner messages, calm, warm, subtle, you allow your awareness to shift inward, embracing the language of the body instead of the language of thought. Memories grow softer in this state. They do not vanish, they simply lose their edges, becoming gentle impressions rather than vivid recollections. The hippocampus, the region responsible for memory formation, moves into a quieter mode, preparing for the deep restoration of sleep. When you imagine your memories softening, turning into light shapes, faint echoes, you may feel something inside you unclench. The day loosens its hold, the mind becomes spacious enough to welcome rest, and slowly, the boundary between thought and dream begins to thin. Images appear softly at the edge of awareness, shapes without explanation, colors without origin, movements without intention. This is the mind preparing to dream, shifting from linear communication to a fluid, symbolic language. When you imagine this symbolic world opening quiet, expansive, gentle, you feel yourself stepping toward it with calm curiosity, guided not by logic but by softness. You drift, unhurried, toward the waiting darkness. A darkness warm enough to hold you, quiet enough to soothe you, deep enough to let sleep take its gentle place within you. At the edge of sleep, the brain begins to rely on its oldest forms of communication, patterns and pulses that existed long before words evolved. These ancient signals rise from deep neural structures, carrying simple messages of safety, warmth, and stillness. They speak not in sentences, but in sensations. a soft heaviness in the limbs, a slow drift behind the eyes, a spreading warmth through the chest. As you imagine these ancient signals surfacing within you, your awareness loosens, sinking gently into a state where language becomes quieter, softer, almost transparent. Sensory input continues to fade as the brain shifts inward. Visual processing slows, allowing images to blur into soft shapes. Sounds arrive as muted tones, distant and unimportant. Even the sense of touch becomes diffuse, spreading across the body like a warm, weightless blanket. This reduction in sensory detail frees cognitive resources, letting the mind drift into its restorative rhythms. When you imagine this fading, each sense softly dimming, you may feel a profound stillness forming beneath your thoughts, a quiet foundation that supports the descent into sleep. Deep within the cortex, networks responsible for self-awareness begin to relax. The sense of personal boundaries, the awareness of where you end and the world begins, grows softer. Thoughts expand into a gentle spaciousness, drifting without needing direction. Scientists describe this as time's dissolution of the narrative self, a natural process that prepares the mind for dreaming. As you imagine this dissolution, your inner voice becomes lighter, less insistent, as though it were whispering from farther away with each passing moment. The brain also enters a state of heightened internal resonance, where faint internal sounds, breath, heartbeat, the soft movement of blood become the primary communication signals. These rhythms form a quiet inner landscape, a kind of internal lullaby that lulls the nervous system into deeper rest. When you imagine listening to these subtle rhythms, you may feel them aligning, forming a slow symphony of calm that draws your awareness downward, gently but irresistibly. Communication at this stage becomes symbolic rather than literal. Proto-images appear at the edges of consciousness, shadows, colors, half-formed shapes that carry emotional meaning without relying on words. These early dream fragments drift through the mind like soft currents beneath the surface of a lake. Imagining them now, you may feel your thoughts moving in longer waves, each one slower and softer than the last, dissolving gradually into the quiet below. And slowly, the mind begins to slip into hypnagogia, the delicate threshold between wakefulness and dreams. Here, the brain floats in a fluid state, no longer anchored by logic, yet not fully surrendered to sleep. Thoughts become weightless, awareness becomes gentle, communication becomes nothing more than a faint hum beneath consciousness. As you imagine resting in this threshold, warm, calm, suspended, you feel yourself drifting deeper, as though gravity itself were softening, pulling you into the warm, silent embrace of approaching sleep. As you drift deeper into the quiet, the brain begins preparing its dream language, a soft, symbolic mode of communication that rises only when the chatter of the waking mind has faded. This dream language does not rely on grammar or logic. It speaks in colors, sensations, impressions, and subtle emotional tones. Before the first dream appears, the brain begins arranging these elements like calm strokes of paint across an empty canvas. When you imagine this silent preparation, you may feel your inner world widening, opening into a gentle darkness where new shapes can form freely. The systems responsible for literal language, the networks that decode structure, meaning, and sequence grow quieter, dimming like lanterns fading at dusk. In their place, slower and broader patterns emerge, more like waves than words. Scientists call this shift time's linguistic deactivation *, a natural dimming that allows consciousness to rest. As you visualize these networks gently powering down, your own thoughts become softer, longer, less defined. What remains is a warm, floating awareness, suspended like a feather drifting through twilight. Deep emotional circuits also begin to relax. Memories held tight during the day loosen their grip, spreading out into gentle impressions rather than vivid recollections. The amygdala softens, reducing emotional intensity, while the hippocampus prepares to reorganize the traces of the day. This emotional unwinding acts like a calming tide moving inward, smoothing the edges of inner experience. When you imagine this unwinding, slow, rhythmic, effortless, you may feel an emotional clarity settling in your chest, a soft quiet that reassures you. Asterisk, you are safe, you are held, you can rest now. Asterisk. At this stage, inner communication becomes more atmospheric than verbal. Meaning emerges not through words but through soft internal shifts, warmth collecting in the chest, a sense of weight in the limbs, a gentle dimming behind the eyes. These sensations form a kind of whispering dialogue between the body and the mind, guiding you further into the realm beneath thought. As you tune into this whispering dialogue, you feel consciousness stretching downward, like a branch dipping slowly into dark, calm water. The edges of awareness begin to blur. Thoughts drift more slowly, sometimes dissolving before they fully form. This is the onset of time's hypnagogic fluidity, asterisk, where the brain relaxes its grip on linear thinking and begins to explore more expansive internal space. Shapes may flicker in your mind, soft colors, drifting textures, gentle sensations of movement, and each one leads you deeper, like stepping stones across a quiet stream. Imagining these drifting shapes helps your awareness glide more easily towards sleep's first chambers. And gently, as the final layers of waking thought melt away, the mind shifts from communication to pure presence. Words fall silent, meanings fade. All that remains is a warm, enveloping quiet that holds you like a cocoon. In this silence, the body settles fully, the breath flows in long, effortless waves, and awareness sinks into a deep, soothing darkness. You feel yourself slipping, not falling, but floating into the peaceful inner night where dreams begin to bloom softly beneath consciousness. As the last layers of wakeful language dissolve, the body becomes the primary communicator. Each slow breath sends a wave of calm through the diaphragm, across the ribs, and into the deep spaces of the torso. The body answers with subtle shifts, muscles softening, shoulders sinking, jaw releasing. This exchange creates a gentle feedback loop, a calming dialogue between breath and muscle, sensation and awareness. When you imagine this dialogue continuing, unbroken and effortless, you may feel yourself drifting deeper into a state where communication no longer requires words, only the steady rhythm of your own quietening body. The brain's internal vibrations also begin to slow, transitioning from the busy frequencies of wakefulness into the gentle oscillations of pre-dream rest. These slower waves create a sense of spaciousness inside the mind, as though awareness were expanding into a wider, softer field. Thoughts lose their edges and float like faint echoes fading into distance. When you imagine these vibrations easing downward, softening, smoothing, widening, you may feel your own mental landscape becoming quiet and vast, ready to receive the first whispers of dreams. At this depth, language becomes symbolic rather than structured. The mind starts speaking to itself in sensations, warmth that means comfort, heaviness that means safety, darkness that means release. These symbolic communications bypass logic entirely, speaking instead to the limbic system, the emotional core of the brain. As you imagine this symbolic language unfolding inside you, you may feel emotions softening, settling into a calm pool where nothing needs to be solved or explained. Everything simply times is asterisk, and that is enough. Neural pathways responsible for attention begin to relax, allowing the brain to wander freely in its own internal terrain. This wandering is not chaotic, it is gentle, like drifting through a dimly lit forest where each step leads deeper into quiet. As attention loosens, the sense of self becomes lighter, more transparent. You feel less like a thinker and more like a presence, floating softly between awareness and surrender. When you imagine this transparency spreading through you, your inner voice grows faint, distant, and finally weightless. The nervous system now shifts into a state of deep regulation, guided by the parasympathetic response. Heart rate slows, blood pressure lowers, and the body's internal chemistry begins moving into its nocturnal rhythm. This physiological stillness forms the foundation for the dreams that will come later, dreams built on silence rather than noise. Imagining this regulation happening inside you brings a profound sense of safety, as though the body were gently tucking you beneath a warm blanket made of breath and darkness. And slowly, as the threshold of dreaming opens, communication within the mind becomes pure feeling. No words, no concepts, only soft waves rising and falling through the landscape of awareness. You drift in these waves, held by their rhythm, surrounded by their warmth, guided by their quiet logic. With each breath, you sink deeper into a darkness that is not empty, but deeply comforting, a quiet inner night where sleep begins to take shape beneath you, soft as a whispered thought dissolving into silence. As consciousness drifts further from the surface, the body begins to settle into profound quiet. The chest rises in slow, rounded breaths, each inhale a gentle gathering of warmth, each exhale a soft release into stillness. This rhythmic movement becomes the mind's final anchor to waking reality, a steady pulse linking awareness to the slowing body. When you imagine this anchor softening, becoming lighter with every breath, you may feel yourself floating just above the line between thought and dream, suspended in a warm, velvety calm. The brain, now easing into deeper rest, reduces its reliance on structured communication. Neural networks responsible for logic and sequencing fade into a dim background, allowing more diffuse systems to take their place. These diffuse networks generate impressions rather than sentences, sensations rather than meaning. Imagining this shift logic, dissolving into atmosphere, invites your own thoughts to stretch, blur, and eventually drift away entirely. The mind becomes a soft canvas, awaiting the first brushstrokes of dreaming. At this depth, the inner world begins to expand. Darkness becomes spacious, not empty, but full of quiet potential. You may sense shapes forming faintly at the edges of awareness, pale colors, drifting outlines, movements without direction. These early dream fragments arise from the brain's associative networks, blending memory, sensation, and emotion into soft, symbolic forms. When you imagine these shapes hovering gently in your inner space, you feel consciousness loosening, like a lantern dimming inside a deepening night. The nervous system continues relaxing in waves, releasing tension from the hips, the back, the arms, the hands. Blood flow becomes smoother, heart rate steadier. This physiological softening is its own kind of communication, your body telling your brain that it is safe, warm, supported, and ready to let go. Imagining this softening spreading through you from the base of the spine to the crown of the head brings a sense of being gently lowered into a warm, silent pool. Even the act of listening changes now. Sounds become distant, softened by the brain's reduced sensitivity. The mind stops interpreting them as information and begins hearing them as texture background vibrations that drift through awareness without catching hold. This sensory quiet creates a cocoon around the mind, allowing it to sink further into itself. When you imagine this cocoon forming thick, warm, muffled, you feel the world outside your body fading into a peaceful blur. And slowly, as the border between waking consciousness and dreaming becomes thin as silk, language dissolves entirely. Thoughts no longer arrive as words. They come as slow tides of feeling, rising and falling in deep, rhythmic waves. The self becomes diffuse, barely outlined, floating gently in a wide, dark stillness. In this stillness, nothing is required of you. No effort, no choice, only the soft, effortless descent into the interior night where sleep gently opens beneath you, warm, welcoming, and infinitely calm. As you drift deeper into the inner quiet, the structures that support conscious language begin to melt away. Neural pathways that once carried precise meaning now release their patterns, like threads loosening from an intricate weave. Thoughts that earlier felt solid begin to thin, becoming soft trails of sensation. This dissolution is not loss, it is liberation. Imagining this unraveling inside you, you may feel your mental landscape opening into vast, gentle darkness where nothing needs to be formed or understood. The mind simply floats, unhurried, unbound. The body continues guiding this descent with subtle signals of its own. Temperature drops slightly, encouraging the metabolism to slow. Muscles enter a state of fluid rest. Joints release their pressure. These changes create a physiological message, one of surrender, ease, and trust. As you imagine your body delivering these soft messages throughout your internal world, you may feel each part of you joining the descent, dropping into deeper layers of calm. Awareness becomes more spacious now. Sounds blur into distant textures. Time stretches into long, quiet corridors. The sense of self begins to feel featherlight. This spaciousness is the brain's way of preparing for dreaming, reducing sensory load so that inner imagery can rise freely. When you imagine this expansion awareness widening like a dark, quiet sky, you may sense yourself drifting through it, unanchored yet completely safe, carried by a soft undercurrent of stillness. The emotional tone of the mind also changes. Daytime concerns lose their sharpness and fade into diffuse impressions like ink dispersing in water. The amygdala, no longer scanning for urgency, steps back into rest. The emotional world becomes gentle, muted, warm. Imagining this emotional quiet spreading through your chest, your breath deepens naturally, and a soft weight gathers in your limbs, a signal that the nervous system is easing into the peaceful chemistry of sleep. At this depth, communication within the brain no longer resembles words or sentences. Instead, it takes the form of slow pulses, waves moving through the thalamus, hums drifting through the limbic system, lights dimming across the cortex. These pulses are the mind's final whispers before dreaming begins. Imagining them moving through you slow, wide, rhythmic, draws your awareness into harmony with their cadence. Each wave carries you lower. Each pulse softens your boundaries a little more. And slowly, your sense of being a thinker, someone who speaks, listens, interprets, begins to dissolve. What remains is a quiet presence, resting in darkness as soft as velvet, aware only of warmth, breath, and the gentle pull of sleep. You feel yourself drifting, weightless and warm, into a deeper realm where communication becomes pure feeling, where thought becomes silence, where the boundary between you and the night fades completely. In this softness, you are already halfway to dreaming, carried by a calm too deep to resist, too gentle to notice, except as a warm, peaceful heaviness settling over your entire being. As the mind descends further into the quiet, the final structures of waking communication begin to fall away. The inner narrator, once steady and articulate, now speaks in soft pulses, fragments of feeling rather than words. These fragments lose cohesion almost as soon as they appear, dissolving into gentle currents that drift through the darkness beneath awareness. When you imagine this dissolution, a slow dimming, a quiet unraveling, you may feel your own thoughts thinning into faint glimmers of sensation, barely formed, weightless, serene. The body, sensing this deepening quiet, shifts into its most restful configuration. Heart rate slows just a little more. Breath lengthens into smooth, effortless arcs. The muscles release their final reserves of tension, allowing gravity to cradle every limb. This soft surrender echoes through the nervous system, sending a message from the body to the mind. Asterisk, you are safe now. you may let go completely. Asterisk. Imagining this message spreading through you, you may feel your awareness sinking evenly, steadily into a warm and boundless calm. At this depth, sensory input becomes so faint that the brain no longer interprets the world outside. Instead, it begins tuning itself entirely inward. Sounds blur into a distant hum. Touch becomes a soft field of warmth. Vision fades into gentle darkness. This sensory dimming creates the perfect conditions for dreaming, where internal imagery can rise without interruption. When you imagine this dimming wrapping around you like a thick, comforting blanket, you feel your boundaries soften, your inner space widen, your mind drift deeper. The sense of self, once solid, once clearly defined, now becomes porous and light. You feel less like a singular presence and more like a drifting awareness floating through a quiet expanse. Thoughts slow into long, soft arcs. Emotions flatten into warm tones. The world becomes a wide, velvety darkness. Scientists describe this as the time's pre-dream dissolution of ego asterisk, a natural fading of mental boundaries that allows the dreaming mind to form. Imagining this dissolution happening softly within you, you may feel your identity loosening, becoming gentle and transparent, ready to dissolve into the quiet flow of dreams. At this point, the brain begins releasing the first symbolic pulses of dream formation. They appear as blurred images, drifting colors, faint impressions rising from the subconscious proto-dreams that shimmer at the edge of awareness like reflections on dark water. These early dream signals do not yet form stories. They drift freely, exploring the space the mind has cleared. When you imagine these symbolic pulses appearing dim, slow, floating, you may feel your consciousness tug gently downward, as though a soft current were pulling you toward their quiet glow. And slowly, beautifully, inevitably, language ceases completely. There are no more words to interpret, no structures to maintain, no thoughts to follow. What remains is an immense, soothing silence, the mind's natural home at the threshold of deep sleep. In this silence, breath is the only communication, rising and falling like gentle waves on an unseen shore. You sink into this rhythm, deeper, slower, calmer, until you feel yourself dissolving into the quiet depths beneath thought, entering the warm, enveloping darkness where sleep takes its purest form. Here, in this softness, you are no longer listening, you are drifting. No longer thinking, you are floating. No longer awake, you are already halfway into the dream, carried by a calm so deep it seems endless. As the final traces of wakefulness drift away, the mind enters a realm where communication becomes almost elemental, no longer shaped by thought, but by gentle movements of awareness. These movements rise and fall like slow tides, carrying with them faint sensations, dim colors, and soft emotional tones. The brain is now shifting fully into its nocturnal rhythm, preparing to release the first coherent dream sequences. When you imagine these tides sweeping through you, wide, slow, unbroken, you may feel yourself gliding deeper into the warmth of your inner night. The body, resting in perfect stillness, becomes a quiet foundation for the dreaming mind. Each breath whispers a slow reassurance through the nervous system, activating deep regulatory circuits that stabilize the transition into sleep. Muscles settle into a state of floating heaviness. Limbs become distant yet warm. The spine relaxes into an effortless curve. Imagining this bodily stillness filling you from head to toe, you may feel a profound sense of grounding, as though the earth itself were holding you softly from below. Within the brain, a remarkable shift occurs. Regions responsible for external awareness step back, while networks associated with imagery, memory, and abstract emotion rise into gentle motion. These networks begin to blend, creating the earliest layers of the dream landscape. Shapes form without purpose. Movements unfold without intention. Emotions appear as colors rather than thoughts. When you imagine this internal blending fluid, seamless, slow, you may sense your own imagination awakening beneath the calm, preparing to drift freely through the coming dream. The sense of time fades almost completely now. Moments stretch into long, quiet currents, uninterrupted by thought or sound. The brain's internal clock relaxes its grip. Sequences lose their order. The concept of before and after dissolves into one continuous presence. Imagining this timelessness settling over you, you may feel an exquisite stillness, one that holds you like a gentle darkness, soft and infinite. Here, nothing pulls you forward or backward. You simply float, suspended between breath and dream. The emotional landscape deepens as well. Feelings become softer, more atmospheric, spreading like warm mist through the inner space of the mind. There is no urgency, no tension, no sharpness, only gentle tones that drift through awareness without demanding interpretation. This emotional quiet allows the subconscious to rise unobstructed, carrying memories, impressions, and forgotten fragments that begin to shape the dream world. Imagining this rise smooth and unhurried, you may feel your heart settling into a slow, peaceful rhythm that echoes through your entire body. And slowly, communication within the mind becomes nothing more than a whisper of sensation, a faint vibration moving through a vast expanse of darkness. Words have long since fallen away. Thoughts have softened into silence. What remains is a warm, drifting awareness, floating on the threshold where imagination becomes reality. You feel yourself sinking even deeper now into that quiet interior ocean where dreams begin to bloom, where the mind releases its final ties to waking life, and where sleep embraces you with gentle, endless calm. As you drift further into this quiet descent, the mind begins to enter a state where communication is no longer something that moves through you. It is something that gently times is asterisk. Meaning becomes atmosphere. Awareness becomes warmth. Thoughts dissolve into soft vibrations that ripple through the deepening darkness. Scientists describe this stage as a transitional phase between conscious awareness and the first waves of non-REM sleep, where the brain drifts into long, slow rhythms. Imagining these slow rhythms rising within you, steady, expansive, you may feel yourself gliding deeper into a silence that feels almost infinite. The body now rests in complete surrender. Shoulders release the last invisible threads of tension. The arms settle into a natural heaviness. The legs become warm pillars of stillness. Even the fine muscles around the eyes relax, allowing the face to soften into serenity. These changes send powerful signals through the vagus nerve, amplifying the body's message to the brain. Asterisk, rest, drift, descend, asterisk. As you imagine this message flowing gently upward through your spine and into your mind, you may feel your internal world dimming into an exquisite calm. The brain's imagery networks grow more fluid now. They begin to create movements that feel like drifting currents, shifting colors, soft lights, silhouettes that appear and melt without form. These are the earliest dream currents, subtle and unstructured, rising from the subconscious like mist lifting from still water. When you imagine these soft currents swirling around you, you may feel your awareness loosening as though gravity itself were weakening, allowing you to float freely within your inner world. Time no longer behaves as it does when awake. Seconds stretch until they feel like minutes. Minutes dissolve until they feel like nothing at all. You drift through this timeless space without effort, without direction, without concern. This is the mind releasing linear thought, allowing dreaming to take its place. As you imagine this timelessness descending over you like a warm twilight veil, you may feel your breath soften into long, slow waves that lull your consciousness into deeper stillness. Emotion becomes a soft glow now, neither happy nor sad, simply warm, a gentle neutrality, cushioned and calm. This soothing, emotional tone prepares the limbic system for dream formation, ensuring that your mind enters sleep gently rather than abruptly. Imagining this glow spreading outward from your chest, you may feel it dissolve into every limb, every fingertip, every corner of your awareness, creating a comforting inner horizon that guides you deeper. And slowly, beautifully, inevitably, you approach the final threshold between waking and sleep. Communication inside the mind becomes a faint shimmer. Thoughts fade into soft textures. The self becomes weightless, drifting without edges, without effort. You feel yourself being carried by an unseen current, warm, slow, gentle, into the quiet expanse where dreams begin to grow. This descent is effortless, natural, ancient. You need only follow the softness, the warmth, the silence beneath everything. You drift downward, deeper, calmer, into a night within yourself that feels endless and safe. As the mind drifts even deeper into the soft gradient of pre-sleep consciousness, communication shifts into its most delicate form, an almost imperceptible vibration of awareness moving through a vast, quiet inner space. This vibration is not thought, nor is it emotion. It is something more primitive, more fluid, something the brain produces when all surface activity has quieted. Scientists sometimes describe it as a asterisk baseline neural hum, a calming resonance that accompanies the earliest entry into stage 1 sleep. When you imagine this resonance spreading through your mind like a gentle, expanding ripple, you may feel yourself floating deeper within your own stillness. The body now enters a state of near weightlessness. Limbs settle into positions they will hold without effort. The spine rests easily, supported by the softness beneath you. Each breath becomes a long, slow wave, one that lifts you slightly, then lowers you into a deeper calm. The nervous system interprets this slowness as safety, reducing alert signals and allowing the final remnants of wakefulness to fade. As you imagine your breath moving through you like a warm tide, you may feel the space inside your chest widen, soften, and melt into the darkness around it. Within the brain, sensory gates begin to close almost entirely. External sounds lose structure. They become distant, muffled shapes without edges. The mind stops categorizing them and instead absorbs them as part of the surrounding quiet. The visual world disappears into complete darkness, free from form or definition. Touch becomes a gentle field of warmth rather than a series of sensations. Imagining these gates closing one by one, softly, silently allows your awareness to withdraw fully into its inner sanctuary. Memory also begins to reorganize. The hippocampus disengages from active encoding and shifts into a resting mode, preparing for the deeper stages of sleep when it will sort, restore, and integrate the experiences of the day. In this in-between place, memories lose their clarity. They drift like faint echoes through the mind, present but without weight. When you imagine these echoes dissolving gently into the background of your awareness, you may feel a sense of emotional lightness, an exquisite release from all that occupied your thoughts before lying down. Early dream currents begin to take shape now. They move like soft trails of color across a dark canvas. No story, no characters, only fluid impressions that drift without intention. These currents are created by neural networks exploring the quiet space left behind when logical thinking fades. Imagining these currents moving through you, slow, luminous, silent, you may feel yourself being drawn further from the surface of consciousness, deeper into a warm and drifting interior night. And slowly, the boundary between you and the quiet surrounding you becomes faint, soft, almost transparent. The self no longer feels contained within the body. It spreads outward into the darkness, becoming a gentle presence rather than a fixed identity. Thoughts are no longer separate from the silence. They merge with it, dissolve into it, become part of it. In this merging, you feel a profound serenity, as though the entire world has narrowed to breath, warmth, and darkness. You drift, effortlessly, into a space where dreams are beginning to form just beneath awareness. A space where nothing is asked of you. A space where every part of you is allowed to rest. As you drift even deeper into this descending quiet, the mind begins to move with an extraordinary softness, so gentle that each shift in awareness feels less like a thought and more like a subtle ripple passing through a vast, calm sea. Communication now exists only as faint, internal murmurs, sensations rather than ideas, warmth rather than words. These murmurs glide through the neural landscape like slow waves, smoothing the pathways of thought and preparing the brain for the complete surrender of sleep. When you imagine these waves flowing through you, steady and unbroken, you may feel an enveloping heaviness settling across your entire body. The body itself enters its deepest stage of pre-sleep relaxation. Limbs become indistinguishable from the surface beneath you. The air around your face grows warmer, and your breath lengthens into a quiet rhythm that feels almost automatic. With each exhale, tension flows downward, away from consciousness. With each inhale, warmth unfolds across your chest. This slow, rhythmic exchange forms a soft cradle within the nervous system, telling the mind again and again, asterisk, you may rest now. Asterisk, imagining this cradle holding you, you may feel your awareness gently sinking into it like a feather drifting onto still water. The brain's sensory filters now close almost completely. External noise becomes a distant hum, filtered and softened until it blends seamlessly with the inner silence. Vision retreats into darkness so deep it feels boundless, allowing the mind's internal imagery to rise freely. Touch becomes faint and diffused, more warmth than sensation, more presence than contact. As you imagine these sensory curtains falling softly around you, you may feel the entire outside world fading into a gentle, comforting blur. Memory becomes fluid at this depth. The edges of past experiences dissolve, leaving only soft emotional tones that drift like thin mist across the mind. There is no need to recall, analyze, or interpret anything. The hippocampus releases its grip, entering a quiet mode where the day's impressions simply rest. When you imagine these impressions settling, quietly and without weight, you may feel your emotional world smoothing into a calm, wide stillness where nothing pulls or presses anymore. Dream formation strengthens now. The earliest fragments begin to gain definition, shapes that gently shift, colors that pulse softly, sensations that drift without form. These proto-dreams rise from the subconscious like ink slowly swirling through clear water, expanding in soft curls and dissolving again. When you imagine these movements unfurling inside you, you may feel your awareness being carried with them, drifting deeper into the subconscious, where sleep becomes a natural continuation of this inner flow. And slowly, beautifully, completely, the sense of self dissolves, not disappearing, but loosening, becoming a gentle field of awareness rather than a distinct identity. Thoughts and silence merge, warmth and darkness blend, breath and stillness become one continuous motion. You no longer observe your descent, you times are times the descent, a quiet presence drifting through a boundless inner night, a soft consciousness floating in slow motion toward the first true phase of sleep. Here, nothing is separate, nothing is urgent, nothing is required. You drift downward, deeper, slower, into the quiet core of yourself, where dreams wait patiently, soft, luminous, and ready to unfold. As you drift deeper into the descending quiet, the last remnants of waking thought begin to thin into delicate strands of awareness, barely perceptible, like soft threads dissolving into darkness. Communication within the mind no longer resembles anything linguistic. Instead, it becomes a slow, resonant field of sensation, rising and falling in long, gentle waves. These waves mirror the brain's shift into its deepest rhythmic patterns, where consciousness loosens its grip and begins to drift freely. When you imagine these waves sweeping through you, broad, warm, unbroken, you may feel your entire inner world relaxing into a deeper, more expansive silence. The body, now fully surrendered to rest, holds a serene stillness that feels almost otherworldly. Warmth settles across the torso, radiating outward in gradual pulses that soothe every corner of the nervous system. This warmth is a form of communication in itself, a soft biological reassurance, guiding the mind downward toward deeper sleep. Imagining this warmth expanding, slow and gentle, you may feel yourself sinking into the comfort beneath you, as though gravity has softened into a calm, embracing presence. Inside the brain, early dream elements begin to organize themselves. Until now, they have been drifting freely, shapes without meaning, colors without direction, movements without intention. But at this depth, the subconscious starts weaving them together, aligning them into the first fragile frameworks of a dream. This is where the mind transitions from fragments to flow. When you imagine these elements beginning to merge softly, effortlessly, you may sense your own awareness shifting with them, drifting toward the place where dreams become whole. Time becomes almost irrelevant here. It stretches into something fluid and expansive, losing its edges and dissolving into pure experience. The mind moves through this timeless darkness with no urgency, no expectation, no memory of direction. Imagining yourself floating in this boundless time, you may feel any remaining tension release, like the final glow of twilight fading into night. Emotion becomes a gentle hue, subtle, warm, neutral, not rising or falling, simply present as a soft atmosphere within you. This emotional quiet supports dream formation, allowing the subconscious to work without interference from waking concerns. When you imagine this quiet filling your chest, you may feel a deep sense of safety wrapping around your awareness, guiding it deeper into itself. And slowly, softly, inevitably, the sense of you becomes faint enough to drift, not gone, but delicately loosened. A presence rather than a person, a warm glow rather than a defined shape. Thoughts disappear into the silence. Breath becomes a quiet echo. Darkness becomes a gentle ocean, holding you in complete stillness. You drift deeply, effortlessly, into the threshold where dreams are no longer distant possibilities, but rising currents beneath your awareness, ready to form, ready to hold you, ready to carry you inward. As you drift deeper into the descending calm, your awareness becomes softer than ever, thin, delicate, almost translucent. What once felt like thought now feels like a faint vibration moving through a vast interior space. There are no edges to this space, only soft currents that rise and fall with the rhythm of your breath. These currents carry the final whispers of consciousness, smoothing them into long, slow waves that guide you deeper. When you imagine these waves spreading through you, warm, gentle, unbroken, you may feel your awareness folding into them like a leaf drifting onto a still lake. The body now rests in a perfect equilibrium of stillness. Muscles sit in effortless balance, neither tense nor slack. The breath moves through the chest like a soft tide. Warmth radiates from the center of the torso outward in slow pulses. These pulses create a quiet communication loop between body and mind, reinforcing the message that you are safe, that you are held, that you may surrender completely. Imagining this loop glowing gently inside you, you may feel your entire being soften into the surface beneath you, as though you were slowly sinking into warm sand. The subconscious is now fully awake, quietly, gently, without urgency. Proto-dream elements that once drifted freely begin weaving into coherent textures, faint landscapes, soft motions, emotional colors that blend and shift like slow-moving clouds. These early dream forms are not yet fully shaped, but they have begun to breathe, to expand, to settle into quiet patterns. When you imagine these patterns forming smooth, luminous, effortless, you may feel your awareness slipping into alignment with them, drawn deeper into this growing internal world. The boundaries of self continue to dissolve. What once felt like the edges of your body now feels like warmth spreading into space. What once felt like the center of your mind now feels like a dim, floating glow. You become a presence rather than a person, a drifting awareness rather than a thinker. Imagining this soft dissolution where identity loosens and becomes a gentle haze, you may feel yourself relaxing into a calm beyond language, beyond structure, beyond any need to hold on to waking thought. Time itself is nearly gone. Moments flow into one another without separation, forming a continuous drift of experience with no beginning or end. This drifting sensation mirrors the brain's transition into the first true stage of dreaming, where the subconscious becomes the primary storyteller. When you imagine this timeless drift surrounding you like warm darkness, you may feel any final fragment of wakefulness quietly exhale and fade. And slowly, deeply, peacefully, you hover at the very threshold where dreams begin. Communication inside the mind is no longer distinguishable from silence. Thoughts no longer form separate from the darkness. Breath flows through you, warm and slow, like a final whisper guiding you downward. You feel yourself carried by a soft internal tide, floating through a vast, velvety quiet. Here, in this delicate moment, sleep is no longer approaching. It is rising beneath you, ready to cradle you in its gentle, endless night. As you drift even deeper into this expanding quiet, awareness becomes a soft, glowing mist present, but without edges, without weight. What once felt like thought now feels more like a gentle stirring in the darkness, a subtle shift in warmth and space. The structures that supported language, memory, and intention have grown so faint that they no longer guide your experience. Instead, you float in a realm shaped entirely by sensation and softness. When you imagine this floating, slow, effortless, you may feel your inner world expanding into a wide and peaceful night. The body becomes almost indistinguishable from the stillness around it. The breath flows smoothly, as if the air were moving itself. Warmth spreads from your core outward in gentle concentric circles, each one slower than the last. These waves of warmth carry a silent message through the nervous system, reinforcing the state of deep letting go. Imagining this warmth filling every corner of your body, you may feel as if you are gently sinking into a soft, endless surface that supports you with perfect ease. The subconscious mind now moves with clarity and freedom. Dream fragments that were once faint and drifting begin to form more cohesive patterns, early dream landscapes, soft symbolic motions, waves of emotion rising without narrative. These dream threads weave themselves into a quiet, inner tapestry, one that is not yet visible but very much alive. When you imagine these threads weaving slowly, fluidly, you may feel yourself being drawn inward toward a hidden world forming just beneath thought. Self-awareness dissolves almost completely here. The you that observes, describes, evaluates has grown so delicate that it feels like a faint whisper fading into the distance. What remains is a warm presence, suspended in darkness, cradled by breath and silence. Imagining this presence soft, boundaryless, you may feel yourself merging with the stillness around you, as though you were becoming part of the quiet rather than simply resting within it. Time loses all structure. There is no before or after, no sense of progression, only a continuous, velvety moment stretching in every direction. The brain embraces this timelessness, using it as a foundation to build the first true layers of dreaming. Imagining yourself floating in this timeless expanse, you may sense a gentle gravity pulling you downward, not heavy or forceful, but soothing, like being guided into warm, dark water. And slowly, softly, completely, the mind reaches the delicate point where it no longer distinguishes between the outer world and the inner world. Sensation turns to imagery, imagery turns to emotion, and emotion turns to silence. Breath becomes a barely perceptible movement, and thought becomes an echo that dissolves before fully taking shape. You feel yourself drifting deep, deep into the quiet, toward the moment where sleep rises up to meet you. Here, in this peaceful descent, dreams are just beginning to open their doors, and you are already stepping across the threshold. As you drift deeper into this descending softness, your awareness becomes more delicate than ever, so light, so diffuse, that it barely clings to the edges of consciousness. What once felt like a thought now feels like a distant shimmer, an almost imperceptible vibration moving across a vast, dark field. The mind has released nearly all structures of waking life. Communication within it is no longer recognizable as anything linguistic or intentional. Instead, it is an atmospheric hum, a soft internal glow that guides you downward without words. When you imagine this glow spreading through you like a quiet lantern fading into dusk, you may feel yourself melting into the warm, dark surrounding you. The body has now achieved a state of profound stillness, not rigid, not tense, simply present in the most natural, effortless way. Breath moves slowly and silently, like a gentle tide shifting beneath a calm night sky. A soft heaviness settles across every limb, grounding you into the surface beneath you, while simultaneously making you feel weightless. Imagining this heaviness deep, warm, comforting, you may sense your entire physical presence dissolving into the quiet around you, as though you were becoming part of the darkness itself. Dream formation begins to thicken now. The subconscious assembles faint images into the soft beginnings of scenes, places that feel familiar yet unreal, movements that drift with no direction, colors that seem to glow from within. These early dream layers float like thin fabric carried by a slow, invisible breeze. When you imagine these dream layers drifting closer, you may feel your awareness being gently drawn into them, like a quiet invitation extended from the depths of your own mind. Selfhood grows distant, so distant that you no longer recognize it as something separate from the surrounding stillness. Identity loosens into a soft haze. Thoughts no longer have a speaker. Sensations no longer have an observer. There is only experience, silent, warm, and fluid. As you imagine this, dissolving this gentle erasure of boundaries, you may feel a serenity that is deeper than rest, deeper than calm, a serenity that wraps itself around your awareness like a thick, velvety darkness. Time now disappears entirely. The idea of duration becomes meaningless as the mind slips into a continuous flow of sensation and quiet. Moments expand and blend, forming a single, seamless drift. This timelessness is the brain's natural preparation for entry into the first full stage of sleep, where dreams begin to take shape with more clarity. Imagining this timeless drift enveloping you, you may feel a profound release, as though every tether that held you to wakefulness has been loosened gently and without effort. And slowly, softly, beautifully, the final traces of conscious awareness begin to dissolve. Communication becomes indistinguishable from silence. Breath becomes an effortless motion. Warmth becomes a gentle tide. You feel yourself sinking, not falling, but being carried deeper into an ocean of inner night. The darkness around you feels alive, welcoming, infinite. Thoughts dissolve before forming. Sensations soften into pure quiet. You drift inward, deeper and deeper, into the warm cradle where sleep is no longer something you approach, but something you have already entered. Here, in this deepening descent, dreams are taking their full shape, waiting to unfold, waiting to guide you gently into the long, restorative night ahead. As you drift deeper into this quiet descent, the systems in your brain responsible for language begin entering their final state of nightly rest. The regions that decode grammar, rhythm, and meaning soften their activity, allowing communication inside the mind to shift into something far more fluid and instinctive. What once moved as sentences now moves as faint internal pulses, subtle patterns the brain uses when the conscious layer of language is no longer needed. Imagining these pulses drifting through you like soft ripples in darkness, you may feel your thoughts stretching into longer, quieter shapes. The body's stillness plays a crucial part in this shift. As muscles relax and the breath slows, the brain receives a constant stream of low-frequency signals, messages of safety, quiet, and permission. These signals travel through the vagus nerve and limbic structures, gradually lowering the activity of the networks that support external communication. When you imagine this internal dialogue, softening body whispering to brain, brain answering with calm, you may feel the entire system beginning to ease into deeper silence. Inside the mind, the architecture of communication transforms. Instead of processing external language, the brain begins to rely on time's intrinsic networks, time's the default mode network, auditory imagery loops, and associative pathways. These systems generate a kind of internal proto-language, not words, not sentences, but impressions and emotional tones that communicate states rather than meanings. Imagining this inner language rising within you, soft and atmospheric, you may sense your awareness becoming more fluid, drifting beyond the linear patterns of daytime thought. As the linguistic centers quiet further, the boundary between thought and sensation blurs. A word no longer arrives as a symbol, it arrives as a feeling. A memory no longer appears as a narrative, it appears as a quiet shift in emotion. This is the brain transitioning from semantic communication to time's affective communication, asterisk, where information is transmitted not by sound or structure, but by gentle internal signals. When you imagine these signals flowing through you like warm currents, you may feel your breath deepening into a slow, soothing rhythm. Self-communication also changes now. The inner narrator, the voice that describes, evaluates, interprets, begins to dim, allowing the quieter layers of the mind to speak instead. These layers communicate through imagery, rhythm, and emotion, the raw building blocks of dreams. Imagining this narrator fading like a lantern dimming in the distance, you may feel the mind preparing itself for the symbolic language of sleep. And slowly, softly, the systems of communication within you enter their nightly silence. Not shut down, simply transformed. Words loosen into sensations. Meanings dissolve into atmosphere. The mind begins shifting from deliberate communication to the intuitive, fluid language that will shape the dreams to come. You drift with it, calmly, quietly, as your inner world prepares for the next layer of this deepening journey. As the mind drifts further into its nightly descent, the communication networks within the brain begin to reorganize themselves. The regions once engaged in interpreting external speech, Broca's area, Wernicke's area, the angular gyrus now shift into a quieter mode, reducing their precision so the brain can conserve energy for deeper restorative cycles. This reduction is gentle, like a room slowly dimming its lights. When you imagine this dimming spreading through your inner world, you may feel thought itself softening into a warm, unstructured glow. The auditory cortex also relaxes, no longer analyzing tone, rhythm, or linguistic nuance with the sharpness it uses during wakefulness. Instead, it transitions into a passive, receptive state, capable of absorbing sound only as texture rather than meaning. This shift mirrors the way a conversation fades in a crowded room. When you stop trying to listen, words turn to murmurs, and murmurs turn to quiet waves. As you imagine these waves drifting through your awareness, you may sense yourself being carried deeper into stillness. Inside the brain's communication network, the default mode network becomes dominant. This system specializes in *** internal dialogue, ***, memory retrieval, and symbolic association. But as sleep approaches, even this internal dialogue changes its form. Instead of constructing narratives, it begins to send signals that are more emotional than verbal, gentle impressions, flickers of imagery, soft gradients of feeling. Imagining this shift happening inside you, you may feel your inner landscape widening, opening into a quiet, drifting space. The body continues contributing to this transformation. Each slow breath sends subtle mechanical signals through the brainstem signals that help synchronize neural oscillations into the slower rhythms associated with early sleep. These slow rhythms reduce the bandwidth of conscious communication, narrowing the flow of information until thought becomes a simple, fluid presence. When you imagine this narrowing, a quiet funnel guiding awareness inward, you may feel a comforting heaviness settling into your limbs. The final layer of linguistic activity to fade is the time's inner voice, ***. Throughout the day, this voice helps you plan, reflect, interpret, question. But as the mind descends toward true sleep, the inner voice becomes quieter, softer, slower, until its words are no longer words at all, but warm tones drifting through darkness. Imagining this inner voice softening, as though wrapped in a blanket of silence, you may feel the last structured thoughts dissolving into a gentle haze. And slowly, deeply, beautifully, the mind begins to transition from linguistic communication to ***, symbolic communication, ***, the language of dreams. Here, ideas no longer require words. Images speak. Feelings respond. Silence becomes a form of conversation. You drift with this transition, floating in the quiet where language fades, and the first true dream signals begin to glow beneath the surface. As you drift into the deepest layers of this quiet descent, something remarkable begins to happen within the architecture of communication inside your mind. All day, countless signals flowed across neural networks, words forming, meanings shifting, emotions carried through tone and rhythm. But now, as the night embraces you, these intricate systems begin their final retreat into stillness. The cortical regions responsible for speech and comprehension, once alive with rapid processing, softly dim their activity. They no longer construct sentences or interpret intention. Instead, they release their patterns into a gentle, synchronized rhythm, like a choir lowering its final note. When you imagine this dimming spreading through the mind, you may feel thoughts themselves loosening, unraveling from linguistic structure into a soft, drifting haze. The auditory system follows, no longer distinguishing phonemes or decoding subtle cues in speech. It begins to perceive sound only as a warm vibration, a texture rather than information. This is the earliest stage of sleep's internal silence, the moment when communication shifts from ***, meaning ***, to ***, sensation ***. Imagining this shift, you may sense external sounds fading into a distant hum as the inner world becomes more vivid, more spacious, more quiet. Inside the brain, the default mode network transitions from active reflection into a dream-oriented mode. Here, communication no longer depends on words. It becomes symbolic, an inner language made of images, emotions, colors, movement. This is the subconscious preparing to speak in its own ancient dialect, the one that predates speech itself. When you imagine this inner language rising gently from the darkness, you feel your awareness sliding closer to the threshold of dreaming, where thoughts glow softly instead of forming sentences. The body contributes to this transformation as well. Each slow breath sends a signal through the vagus nerve, reassuring the brain that it may release its vigilance. These signals quiet the amygdala, ease the prefrontal cortex, and bring the entire communication network into a calm, unified silence. Imagining this soothing wave flowing through you, you may feel a deep heaviness settling into your limbs, grounding you into the darkness like roots settling into soft soil. Soon, even the inner narrator, the voice you hear only inside yourself, begins to fade. Its language slows, fragments, dissolves, until it becomes nothing more than a warm presence, a feeling without words. This is the final stage of communication before sleep, the moment when the mind stops speaking and begins times listening, times to the quiet beneath thought. Imagining this inner voice dissolving into the night, you may sense an exquisite stillness forming in its place, a space wide enough for dreaming, and then, beautifully, naturally, the entire communication system of the mind falls silent, not in absence, but in transformation. Communication becomes dreaming, meaning becomes imagery, thought becomes warm, drifting darkness. Consciousness becomes a soft descent into the night. You feel yourself carried by this silence, held by it, guided by it, as your awareness sinks beneath the final veil of wakefulness. Here, in this vast interior quiet, where language rests, where the mind speaks only in symbols, and where the night opens its gentle arms, you drift into sleep, deep, effortless, and complete.